My son slapped me in front of my relatives on Thanksgiving Day. My daughter-in-law sneered and clapped her hands. I just smiled and opened a door, one that would show them the price of $12 million worth of ungratefulness. The sound cracked through the room louder than clinking wine glasses or the football game playing in the background. My head snapped sideways, and I felt the sting before the pain, heat blooming across my cheek as I stumbled back into the chair behind me. My lips split. I tasted blood. Rachel clapped. "Bravo," she said, smirking like she just watched a soap opera climax. Finally said what we're all thinking. I sat there blinking, heart thudding in my chest, while 23 faces turned away. Some looked down at their plates. Some shifted in their seats. No one moved. Not one person reached out to help me. Not one asked if I was all right. Michael, my son, my only son, stood over me, jaw tight, hand still half raised. The same hand I used to hold when he was learning to walk. The same hand I used to kiss goodnight when monsters lived under his bed. "You want to know why I hate Thanksgiving, Mom?" he said, stepping closer to the table. "Because every year I have to pretend I'm grateful for a woman who's done nothing but drag us down. You just sit there breathing our air, eating our food, offering nothing." He grabbed the carving knife and slammed it down on the table. Plates clattered. "You're not a mother. You're a debt, a stain. If you dropped dead tomorrow, it would be a relief." God bless her rotten heart, laughed. The house smelled of roasted turkey, cinnamon, sweet potatoes with marshmallows. The dining table gleamed, every fork in place, the centerpiece a wreath of dried flowers I had arranged myself at 6 that morning. I had spent 2 days cooking. Nobody asked if I needed help, nobody said thank you. My granddaughter Savannah, 12 years old, looked up from her seat and giggled. "Why is Grandma carving the turkey? She didn't even do anything this year. She just watches TV." That was before the slap, before the silence, before the blood. But it was always leading here. I looked down at my hands, still shaking, still red from the oven heat, and folded them in my lap. I did not cry. I did not speak. I sat in the same chair where my husband once carved the turkey with pride and grace. And I waited, because this was not the end of my story. It was the beginning. I was once the head nurse at St. John's Hospital for 38 years. I knew how to find a vein in the dark. I delivered babies in parking lots, stitched open wounds in emergency rooms so full the gurneys lined the halls. Every scar I bandaged. Every life I helped extend, it was all for my son. So he would never know what it meant to struggle. So he would never have to sacrifice the way I did. Michael was born after 5 years of trying. He was my answered prayer. When he got into Columbia, I cried into the uniform I had worn for over 3 decades. I sold my wedding ring to help cover the first year's tuition. I picked up extra overnight shifts for every textbook he needed. When he graduated, I paid the security deposit for his first apartment in the city. I co-signed the loan when he opened his marketing agency. When he married Rachel, I gave him the last of my savings for their honeymoon and told him to start his life free of debt. Then Joseph, my husband of 42 years, passed away in his sleep, and everything changed. Michael called a week after the funeral. His voice was kind, measured. "Mom, you should come live with us. You shouldn't be alone. It's time someone takes care of you." I said yes. I was tired, grieving. I thought it was love. But it wasn't love, it was control. The first month, Rachel took my phone to simplify the family plan. Calls stopped coming in. My friend Camille from church said she tried to visit, but Rachel told her I was resting and not up for company. The second month, Michael brought me a stack of paperwork. "Just bank stuff, Mom. We want to make sure everything's streamlined. Just sign here and here." I didn't read it. I trusted my son. A week later, I found out I had signed away my share of the house Joseph and I had partially owned. My name was gone from the deed. The only place I existed in that house was in a few faded photos on the stairwell, and even those would soon disappear. My bedroom door had no lock. My medication was kept in a box Rachel controlled. Once I asked to get my own refill, and she said, "Too risky. You get confused too easily. Just let me handle it." I was not confused. I was being erased. At dinner, I was not allowed to eat until everyone else had finished. I waited by the sink, plate in hand, hoping there'd be enough roasted chicken or mashed potatoes left. Some nights there wasn't. They said I needed structure, so I was given a schedule. Clean the laundry room on Tuesdays. Fold the towels on Thursdays. Rachel once looked me up and down and said, "At least this way, you're earning your keep." One Sunday I mentioned I missed my choir. Rachel laughed. You wouldn't even be able to hit the notes anymore. Michael said nothing. He just kept reading the paper. And still I stayed, because I told myself this was what mothers did. They endured. They forgave. They waited for their children to remember who they were. But every day I realized I was not a mother in that house. I was a servant, and not even a wanted one. One morning I was pouring oatmeal into a chipped ceramic bowl. My bowl, the only one Rachel allowed me to use. When I heard her voice behind me, sharp and low like the edge of a knife. Living with you is like living with a curse, she said. Even dogs have the decency to show loyalty. I turned slowly, still holding the spoon. Her lips curled into something that might have once passed for a smile. You're like a storm that never ends. You bring cold with you and guilt, and that smell, like dust and old medicine. I did not respond. I had learned that silence was safer than truth in this house. Later that day, I dropped one of my pills. My hands, too stiff and slow, missed catching it. The pill rolled under the kitchen island. I knelt carefully, one hand on the linoleum to keep from slipping. When I stood back up, Rachel was standing at the counter with the bottle in her hand. Really, she said, raising her eyebrows. You can't even take your meds without turning it into a scene. I'm sorry, I murmured. She walked over to me, held the bottle at eye level, then raised her arm and threw it at my chest, hard. Take it, she snapped. And hurry. Old people get dramatic when they think they're dying. The bottle hit my sternum and bounced to the floor. I heard the pills inside rattle like dry seeds. I bent down, picked it up, unscrewed the cap with shaking fingers, and took the pill. It tasted like shame. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands. These same hands had held my son's body when he was barely the length of my forearm. These hands had clapped for him at his high school graduation, wiped his nose during flu season, held his shaking shoulders after his first heartbreak. And these same hands, now wrinkled and weak, were no longer welcome to touch anything in his house. I looked toward the shelf beside my bed. There sat an old cassette recorder I had kept from my nursing days, once used to dictate. Then came the afternoon of the photo. It was raining outside, the sky bruised and angry. Rachel stormed into my room holding her phone, furious because a relative had tagged me in an old Facebook photo from Michael's wedding. I had commented with a simple heart emoji. Apparently, that was embarrassing. Are you that desperate to be remembered? She hissed. I didn't answer. She scanned the room, her eyes full of hunt. Then she saw it, my wedding photo, a black and white portrait framed in silver from 1972. My husband's tie was crooked. I wore a veil borrowed from a neighbor. We looked happy, real happy. She reached for it. No, I said, for the first time in a long time. Too quickly, too loudly. She turned to me. What's this? Your little shrine. She lifted the frame and looked at it with disgust. You think this means anything to anyone but you. Before I could stop her, she slammed it onto the floor. The glass cracked like gunfire. I gasped. She left the room without a word. I knelt down, my knees screaming, my hands trembling. But I gathered every shard. Behind the picture, where only I knew to look, was a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges. Inside a copy of my husband's last will and testament. He had made a backup before he died. Tucked it in a place sacred to both of us. A place he knew they would never look because they never cared. I held the torn photo in one hand and the envelope in the other. And finally I cried. Not because the frame was broken, but because I realized just how much they wanted to erase me. Not just from the table. Not just from their guest lists or family stories, but from my own life. They wanted me gone, forgotten. Filed under inconvenient. But I was not gone. And I would not be forgotten. That night, I recorded a new entry, May 10th. She broke the frame, but not the memory. Not the truth. Then I locked my door and began to plan. They say old people get confused easily. They say we forget things, lose track of time, sign papers without reading. They think because our hands shake and our memories blur around the edges, we must not know how the world works anymore. Let me tell you something. I was quiet. I was tired. But I was never stupid. After Rachel shattered the wedding frame, I waited until the house was empty. I collected the fragments of glass, the bent silver edges, and the pieces of my past and placed them gently into a box. Then I took the will, my husband's true will, the one he never told Michael about, and walked slowly but surely 2 blocks to the library. There, using the computer with the magnified screen, I searched for a name I hadn't typed in over a decade. Daniel H. Greenberg. He had once been a gangly law student, always late, always grateful for my husband's mentorship. I remembered he had called us his second parents. When my husband passed, Daniel sent flowers. I still had the card. I found his practice, still in Manhattan, still in business. I called the number he answered on the second ring. Daniel Greenberg. Daniel, I said softly. This is Mrs. Lillian Horowitz. My husband was Joseph. Finished. Ms. Horowitz, it's been too long. Are you okay? No one had asked me that in years. I almost cried. 2 days later, I sat across from Daniel in his office, hands folded neatly on my lap. I handed him the envelope with the will. He read in silence for 15 minutes. When he looked up, his face was pale. Do you know what this means? He asked. I know Joseph left something for me. I just didn't know what. He took out a map, a list of property IDs. 3 parcels of land, all in Brooklyn, purchased decades ago when the neighborhood was still Polish bakeries and brick repair shops. Now it was yoga studios and wine bars. Tech executives were paying millions for condos that used to be factories. Do you want to know the value? He asked gently. I nodded. 12 million. Possibly more if we play it right. I felt my throat close. I thought of every time I went without dinner so my son could eat. Every time I skipped medication because I was told it was too expensive. Every insult, every slap of silence at that dinner table. All while I sat on $12 million and no one, not even May, knew it. I took a breath and said quietly, what do we do now? We moved slowly, deliberately. Daniel formed a trust under a generic name, Heritage Estate Holdings. One property was sold through a private buyer. The second through a company Daniel had worked with before. The third we held onto for a few more weeks until an investor doubled his offer. By the end of 3 months, the trust held 12,400,000. Daniel asked, what would you like to do with it? I knew my answer already. I want it to go to mothers like me. Women forgotten by their families. I want them to know they are not alone. He smiled. We formed a nonprofit, the Forgotten Mother Fund. It would provide emergency housing, small grants, travel stipends for women trying to visit estranged children, legal aid for seniors being financially exploited. And then I made a second request. I need a space. Small, discreet, but close. Daniel raised an eyebrow. I want to set up an office, I said, in the basement of my son's house. His mouth opened in shock. Lillian. Do they know? He helped me draft a rental agreement. The trust technically owned the lease under another name. I paid the monthly fee from the estate. The basement, which they never used except to store broken furniture and holiday decorations, was cleaned out, repainted, fitted with a desk, a filing cabinet, a printer, and 2 locked drawers. Technically, they were renting space to a stranger without knowing it. And that stranger was me. Inside one drawer was the final version of my new will. I had removed Michael and Rachel entirely. I included a note that read, I gave you everything I had once. My money, my back, my silence. Now I give you the only thing you ever gave me, nothing. I signed it on a cold Tuesday afternoon. And then I waited. I waited through another birthday where no one said, Happy birthday. Through a night when I had a fever and they said they were too tired to drive me to urgent care. Through summer when Rachel screamed at me because I left one dish unwashed. Through fall when Michael told a neighbor I had dementia because I forgot to close the back gate. I said nothing. Every night, I walked past the basement door and smiled, because they thought they had stripped me of power. They thought they had locked me into silence. But they never learned one simple truth: a quiet woman is not a weak one, she is just waiting for her moment. I woke at 5 that Thanksgiving morning. It was still dark. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ache in my knees. 14 dishes. I had planned each one the night before: turkey with rosemary butter, garlic mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce with orange zest, Rachel's kale salad with pecans, Michael's favorite cornbread stuffing, the pumpkin pie I had made every year since 1974. Everything written in pencil on a yellow legal pad. No one offered to help. Rachel floated through the kitchen once around 10 a.m., coffee in hand, glanced at the trays of raw vegetables and rising bread dough, and said, You're really going all out this year. Just don't burn the turkey. Last year it was dry as hell. Then she disappeared into the bathroom for 2 hours to curl her hair. By noon the house filled with noise. Laughter from the living room. The smell of perfume. Glasses clinking. People arriving with wine bottles, dressed in cashmere and cologne. Cousins I hadn't seen since Michael's wedding. Friends of Rachel's I had never met. And not one came into the kitchen to say hello. I brought out the platters one by one, my hips screaming each time I bent down. As I walked past the dining room, I overheard Rachel, loud enough for the guests and me to hear. My mother-in-law can be a little much. She says strange things sometimes. I just want to apologize ahead of time if she interrupts or says something off. She's been having a hard time adjusting. You know how it is at that age. She smiled sweetly, as if concerned. I kept walking. I took my seat at the far end of the table next to the kitchen door. Dinner began. They toasted to success, to family, to new chapters. Rachel stood to show off her new necklace. Michael thanked everyone for coming. No one mentioned me. Halfway through the meal, Michael cleared his throat and stood. Hey, he said, tapping his glass with a fork. Quick thing before dessert. The room quieted. I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here. It means a lot. Rachel and I have been building something really special these past few years. This home, this life. And we're proud of what we're becoming. It hasn't always been easy, especially with certain distractions. He looked at me. I looked back. But I think we're turning a corner. And I think, Mom, maybe it's time you understood that too. There was a pause. Then, in front of 20 people, cousins, neighbors, old friends, he said, Mom, at some point you have to stop acting like this house is yours, like we owe you something. We don't. You've lived here rent-free. We've fed you, paid your bills, taken care of everything, and still you act like the victim. I could feel the air drain from the room. A few guests looked away. One woman reached for her water glass, trembling slightly. Rachel placed a hand over her heart and looked down solemnly, like she was mourning something. Michael wasn't finished. We're trying to build a future here. A clean image. Clients come over, friends. You showing up during dinners, standing behind people with that look on your face. Well, it's unsettling. So if you can't be part of the solution, Mom, then at least have the decency not to be part of the presentation. Silence. I looked down the long table. Nobody made eye contact. I scanned the room for someone, anyone who might speak up. An old neighbor, a second cousin. But they all looked away, cheeks pink, forks frozen in midair. I nodded. I picked up the carving knife beside the turkey, held it for a moment, then placed it gently back onto the tray. I stood, my chair scraping quietly against the hardwood floor. I smoothed my skirt, straightened my spine, ran one hand through my graying hair. Then I turned and walked out of the dining room. Step by step, I passed the kitchen, the pantry, the hallway with the family photos, none of which included me anymore. At the end of the hall, I opened the door to the basement. Cool air greeted me like an old friend. I descended the stairs one slow step at a time. Behind me, I heard the sound of silverware resume, a single laugh. Someone poured more wine. They thought I was retreating. They thought they had won. But I was not leaving the table in shame. I was walking straight toward justice. I returned upstairs only once, to stand at the edge of the dining room and say in the calmest voice I could muster, I need everyone to follow me downstairs, please. Just for a moment. There was confusion. A few guests chuckled awkwardly. Someone asked, is everything okay? Michael's mouth tightened. Rachel looked annoyed. But no one refused. One by one, they filed down the narrow staircase, wine glasses still in hand, heels clicking on the wood steps. A few grumbled, some whispered, but they followed. At the bottom of the stairs, the lights were already on. The basement was not the dusty, forgotten space they remembered. It had been transformed: white-painted walls, a long table, a projector screen, 2 chairs positioned at the front beside a podium. And waiting patiently in one of those chairs was Daniel Greenberg, dressed in a gray suit, calm and professional. Next to him stood a young man holding a camera. Rachel gasped, "What is this?" Michael blinked. "What the hell is going on?" I stepped forward and said, without raising my voice, "This is my home, Michael. And now it is also the place where the truth lives." The room fell quiet. Daniel stood. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. My name is Daniel Greenberg. I represent Mrs. Lillian Horowitz, and I've been her legal counsel for the past several months." He gestured to the young man with the camera. "For transparency purposes, we are recording this interaction, as is standard procedure when disclosing sensitive estate matters." Rachel stepped forward, visibly shaken. "Estate matters? What is he talking about?" "I'm getting there," I said and reached toward the speaker on the table. I clicked play. At first, nothing. Then static. Then Rachel's voice, sharp and cold, "Living with you is like living with a curse. Even dogs have the chorus of gasps." A woman covered her mouth. Someone's husband muttered, "Jesus Christ." I paused the speaker. I recorded every insult, every threat, every time they called me useless or worse. He adjusted his glasses and pulled out a folder. As of 3 months ago, Mrs. Horowitz has liquidated 3 properties in Brooklyn previously held under her late husband's name. The total value of those sales amounted to $1,200. Gasps rippled through the room. He continued. Those funds have since been transferred into a registered nonprofit trust titled the Forgotten Mother Fund, which will support elderly women facing neglect or abandonment by their families. Michael stepped forward, red-faced. What are you talking about, Mom? Those properties, what do you mean liquidated? You never. I did, I said. You didn't ask because you didn't care. Daniel laid another document on the table. Additionally, Mrs. Horowitz signed a new last will and testament, dated and notarized in 3 different states, with digital and physical backups stored securely. In this document, all previous heirs have been removed. He looked directly at Michael. Including immediate family. Rachel swayed slightly and grabbed the back of a chair. Michael stared at me like he had never seen me before. I stepped forward. My voice did not shake. I am not taking revenge. I am restoring the truth. I looked at them. My son, my daughter-in-law, even the granddaughter who once mocked me over turkey. You are not my heirs. You are not my caretakers. You are not even my family. You are strangers who happen to live in my house. There was silence, thick, final. Then Michael screamed, Mom, what the hell is wrong with you? You're giving all that money to strangers. What about your own blood? I met his eyes. I gave my blood to you when you were born. When you were sick, when you failed and I pulled you back up. I gave my life, and what you gave me back was cruelty. He moved toward me. You're senile. This is insane. You can't even think straight anymore. Daniel raised a hand. Everything has been verified through medical evaluations. Her mind is intact. Her memory is exceptional. The court recognizes her decisions as fully competent. Rachel finally spoke, her voice shrill. We took care of you, we gave you a home. No, I said. You gave me a room and called it a prison. You gave me leftovers and called it love. Michael pointed at Daniel. We're going to contest this. Do you hear me? This is elder abuse. Daniel calmly replied, feel free. The state courts have already reviewed the filings. You'll be contesting against signed recordings, video documentation. Good luck. I took one last breath and turned to the group. You may go back upstairs now. No one moved. Finally, someone whispered, you were right to do this. Another nodded slowly. Then, one by one, they climbed the stairs, leaving Michael and Rachel standing in that basement. The place where their greed had finally been exposed, where their cruelty had found its price. $12 million. 0 cents for them. The exact value of the gratitude they had never shown. 6 months later, I moved into a small apartment overlooking Central Park, funded by a modest allowance from the trust Daniel had helped me establish. The Forgotten Mother Fund had already helped 43 women escape situations like mine. I kept the cassette recorder on my nightstand, but I no longer needed to document cruelty. Instead, I recorded the letters I received. Thank you notes from women who had found safe housing, who had reconnected with loving family members, who had learned that they were not alone. Michael and Rachel tried to contest the will, just as Daniel had predicted. They lost. The recordings were admissible. The medical evaluations were conclusive. The court found no evidence of coercion or diminished capacity. They were forced to sell the house to pay their legal fees. I attended the hearing. Not to gloat, but to ensure that justice was complete. When the judge read the final ruling, upholding my right to distribute my assets as I saw fit, I stood quietly and walked out of that courtroom the same way I had walked out of that basement. With dignity intact and truth on my side. The last thing I heard was Rachel crying in the hallway, asking Michael how they were going to afford rent. I did not turn around. Some questions must be answered by the people who created them. Today, I volunteer at a shelter for elderly women. I help them fill out forms, make phone calls, navigate the system that often forgets they exist. I tell them my story not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that it's never too late to reclaim your worth. The cassette recorder sits on my desk at the shelter now, still working after all these years. But these days, it only records stories of hope, of women who found their voices, of families who learned what love actually means. And sometimes, late at night, I play back that Thanksgiving recording. Not to relive the pain, but to remember the moment I stopped being a victim and became a woman who knew her value.